Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's so wonderful to see you all. My name is Donna Murch, and I teach history at New Brunswick. I'm the chapter president of Rutgers AAUP and also the co-chair of the BIPOC Committee. We are in for a real treat tonight. We have the amazing Davarian Baldwin and many of our brothers and sisters from Camden to talk about questions of reparations. Today is a very special day for multiple reasons. It is the birth date of Eunice Kathleen Wayman, better known to her adoring public as Nina Simone. Few people know that she actually started her singing career in Atlantic City after having been denied admission to the racially discriminatory Curtis School of Music in Philadelphia. It is a reminder to us all about the ongoing fights against racial discrimination in education, which can take multiple forms, from direct exclusion to financial divestment in both the North and the South. Today is also the anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X, which, as many recent revelations have shown, is deeply rooted in the history of New Jersey. So it seems especially fitting to come together to talk about questions of race and reparation in public higher education on this day. In a spirit of respect and remembrance, we will be discussing the many ways that Rutgers-Camden matters. Our South Jersey campus has the largest percentage of Black students in the Rutgers system, and despite its success in opening up the university, it has been denied the resources it needs. Despite increasing its enrollment by over 50% in 2017, by expanding access to college admission through providing free tuition to low-income students, Rutgers-Camden has been consistently underfunded and starved of resources. As we will see tonight, fiscal austerity has had very serious repercussions for the Camden community. And tonight we will be talking about how this came to be and how to change it. As Malcolm X said, with his always incredible sense of allegory and metaphor, sitting at the table does not make you a diner. You must be eating some of what's on the plate. He was speaking about citizenship, but I think we could apply that directly to questions of racial disparity in education. I am so excited to introduce my co-host, Professor Keith Green. He is the Director of Africana Studies and an Associate Professor of English. He's been at Rutgers since 2008. Keith?
Thank you so much, Donna, for that introduction and for your wonderful framing of tonight's discussion in terms of the lives of two iconic freedom fighters, Nina Simone and Malcolm X. And I agree with Malcolm definitely. So let's eat, right? I think folks are hungry and it's time to eat. I'm really excited about tonight's conversation because it centers something that is near and dear to my heart, and that is fighting for resources for the city of Camden and Rutgers University in Camden more specifically. Though I was born in Kingston, Jamaica, and I have no cool accent to show off after being here this long, I also consider Camden, New Jersey as yet another home for me. When I was 11 years old, I moved from Kingston to Camden and started sixth grade at St. Bartholomew's Catholic School in Camden. It's currently where the Boys and Girls Club is. And then went on to Camden High for 4 glorious years. So I have lots of childhood memories in and about the city of Camden. I want to share just one childhood memory of Camden as a way to kind of frame tonight's discussion and why Camden matters. When I was a sophomore in high school in Camden High, and that was about 1991 or 2 or so, Time magazine ran a cover story about Camden. The title of that cover story about Camden was "The Other America. Who could live here? Only people with no other choice." I want to repeat that because I'm speaking and you can't see it. So let me just say it one more time. The title of that Time magazine cover story, and you can Google this, right, was "The Other America. Who could live here? Only people with no other choice." And my classmates and I, we all wrote letters to Kevin Fedarko, who was the author of that piece. And we complained to our teachers, to the administration. They complained with us, and we spoke out. And though I've never seen an article with the same title in reference to Rutgers-Camden, I sometimes get the sneaking suspicion that many people who have never been to Rutgers-Camden and don't know who we are and what we do might have a similar idea in their heads, right? Rutgers-Camden, the other Rutgers, who could teach, learn, and work there, right? Only people who didn't get into Rutgers, New Brunswick or something, right? That's what I imagine, right, is a kind of common narrative and a problematic one, right, about our campus. But tonight's Freedom School is about affirming that Rutgers-Camden is not the other Rutgers. We are Rutgers. Rutgers-Camden, right, is fully and authentically Rutgers in ways that folks don't even know and can't even imagine. And because this is true, because we are Rutgers, we deserve the same resources, opportunities, and considerations that are given to every other campus, every other member within the Rutgers University system. I want to kind of close my opening remarks by referring to a poem written by one of my colleagues and friends, Pat Rosal, right? And it's called An Instance of an Island. I'm just going to read the first 2 or 3 lines. And it simply reads, "One way to erase an island is to invent a second island, absolved of all the sounds the first one ever made." And I'll repeat that. One way to erase an island is to invent a second island, absolved of all the sounds the first one ever made. And that line to me is just so powerful and speaks on so many different levels. But one thing it says to me is that erasure happens not simply by putting something to the side or covering it up, right? Erasure happens by creating an official narrative that subdues that second island, right? And for Rutgers-Camden, I think we've been buried by another narrative of Rutgers as being New Brunswick, as being in Central Jersey, as being something else. But tonight's Freedom School is about affirming the fact that we are not simply a second island, right? We are a legitimate part of Rutgers University, and we represent it in ways which no other campus can, right? So CMD stand up, Rutgers-Camden stand up. It's time to kick off our Freedom School. Let's eat. All right, Donna, back to you.
Thank you so much, Keith, for perfectly setting the table. We are in for such a treat tonight. One of my all-time most favorite people and scholars is here, Professor Davarian Baldwin, who's written an amazing book and has become one of the most important voices in thinking about equity in higher education and the ways that, unfortunately, universities have not conceived of their importance as a public good that should serve communities rather than accumulate profit. Professor Davarian Baldwin is the Paul E. Rather Distinguished Professor of American Studies and the founding director of the Smart Cities Lab at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. His academic and political commitments have focused on global cities, particularly the diverse and marginalized communities that struggle to maintain sustainable lives in urban locales. Professor Baldwin is the author of several books, most recently In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, How Universities Are Plundering Our Cities, Bold Type 2021. This work has allowed him to coordinate with activists and community groups across the country around issues of gentrification, worker rights, policing, and higher education. His related commentaries have been featured in numerous outlets from NBC News, PBS, the History Channel, to USA Today, the Washington Post, and Time. Professor Baldwin, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you so much, Donna and Keith. And I just want to shout out AAUP-AFT and show love to Camden that is definitely in the building. I can see you all on the Zoom chats in the chats. And so it's definitely a blessing and an honor to be here before you and to have a conversation about Camden Matters in both senses of the word, to discuss the matters of Camden and why Camden matters. And so to begin this conversation, I want to give a little bit of a backdrop about the time that we're currently in and how we got here and why that matters. So in the 1990s, we see some critical threads that help shape the present moment. Number one, there's a renewed interest in cities from both residents and new startup companies in the now dominant knowledge economy of med services, pharmaceuticals, software design, and even tourism. On the other side, there's a shrinking state contribution to both public and private higher education. Let's be clear, both public and private schools get public money. So there's a shrinking contribution, and schools must figure out ways to be what the word becomes now, entrepreneurial. So there is this powerful interest convergence between, on one side, municipal leaders, and on the other side, university administrators in this push to turn not just cities, but in the case of Rutgers, the whole state into some version, some iteration of a campus. So the campus form, both its internal structure and its public-facing apparatus, have become a mechanism of wealth extraction for leadership in the city and leadership on campuses and their private partners. This is all happening within the contradictory realities of unprecedented higher ed wealth built on a management system of austerity. In this framework, there have become various modes of extraction that have hidden under higher education's claim to offer a public good. They take place in at least 4 areas I discuss in my book, but there are definitely more: land, labor, healthcare, and policing. In the interest of time, I want to focus today on the areas of land and labor, especially because of their importance to the issues around Camden and AAUP in particular. So land and labor. We rarely, until recently, look at the way in which the presumption of higher education's public good, I'm talking primarily about private schools, but also public schools in other ways. The presumption of its public good is most clearly demonstrated in higher education's 501c3 status as a nonprofit, or in the case of public institutions, as a state institution, as a public entity. What this entity or what this designation provides for is property tax exemption. Now, in the days of the Sleepy Hollow of the campus in college towns, that designation meant far less. But today, as we find the rise of the knowledge economy, which precisely the research and development that is being ramped up to allow schools to become more entrepreneurial, to make up for decreased state contributions, that kind of work, that research and development, is a primary mechanism by which to generate wealth on college campuses under the designation of the public good, which provides a financial tax shelter, because campus buildings and campus properties are property tax exempt. So in this context, there is a public good paradox whereby the status of being a public good becomes the gateway for extracting public resources and funneling them into either the private or the quasi-private interests of the new entrepreneurial university. This has happened in a number of key areas, not that far from where you are, definitely in New Jersey. Just a couple of years ago, in 2016, a number of residents in the historically Black neighborhood of Witherspoon Jackson realized that their property taxes were going up, but there were no contributions or improvements on their services, on their public services. They were wondering why. And they realized it was because they sat next to Princeton University campus buildings that had brokered a deal with the pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly for millions that were sitting on the campus buildings, but was not being funneled or benefiting the city itself. So property taxes were going up, and yet the very benefits or the very services that those practices would pay for, like road maintenance, snow and trash removal, the public schools, were being used by the university, but were not being paid for by the university. So the city itself was paying or covering the burden of the benefits that were going to the main campus. Lest you think this is just a elite private school Ivy League phenomenon, Arizona State University, they also had to become entrepreneurial. They realized that they sat again on tax-exempt land. So what they did was they leased out their land to private developers like State Farm Insurance. So right now, the biggest private development in the state of Arizona is tax exempt because it sits on Arizona State University land. What did the university do? They charged State Farm a slightly smaller fee underneath what would be the property tax. They took that money, and you'll love this at Rutgers, they used it to build a football stadium, and they were able to pay ex-NFL football coach from the Jets, Herm Edwards, a NFL-style salary. And then this arrangement allowed them to circumvent the democratic authority of both the city council and the state legislature. So I just want to lay this out, the way in which the public good becomes, this presumption of the public good becomes a mechanism through which to engage in both land seizure and wealth extraction. Closer to home, if we look at the Lincoln Annex phenomena with the Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital, again, the public good designation of Rutgers University becomes a way to displace a primary Latinx public school to make way for profit-oriented research and development and services within the medical apparatus in the name of higher. And so this is the point where higher education status, its nomenclature, becomes a leverage point to bulldoze and displace. And then, of course, in the name of the public good, these students were slated to be moved to a transitional space that was on a former Brown site. So just to bring it close to home, this dynamic that I'm talking about on a national scale finds its way, its presence in New Jersey. So let's get a little bit closer, talk about how this works on the ground in the case of Camden. You all know, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in more length because AAUP has done a wonderful job of laying out the pernicious nature of the responsibility center management system as the feudal order that it is, as a mechanism whereby austerity is manufactured because of the cost pool transfer that turns a revenue benefit into a $30 million debt. That on itself is egregious. But tonight, I want to talk about this as functioning, how it functions as a particularly racialized wealth extraction mechanism, whereby we can talk about reparations in very real ways and not just kind of Don Quixote tilting at windmills kind of format. So this is a question of racialized wealth extraction and a response of reparations in a very real way. How so? Well, first of all, let's take into account Rutgers' broader DEI objectives, the idea of diversity, equity, inclusion. And we've seen the corporatization of this entire framework across the country after the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others. And this framework that started in social movements has become a corporate model of branding and corporate cover that has also touched universities. So how this plays out in the Camden story is that you have these broad DEI objectives. So what does the Camden campus do? It fulfills these objectives to the highest order. We have this unprecedented increase in the enrollment of first generation and low-income students, many of them predominantly of color, through tuition discounting from the Run to the Top and the Bridging the Gap programs. But instead of being rewarded, instead of being featured through fiscal resources, Camden is penalized for serving the campus mission because it doesn't generate aggressive wealth within the RCM system. However, and this is the important point, however, while within the RCM system, Camden is penalized because these programs that have increased the DEI mission do that to high regard, the campus system receives federal and state revenues and branding for achieving the minority serving institution status. Yet these funds do not funnel back to the campuses of Newark and Camden that make that designation possible. So the important point here is that within the RCM system, that framework of targeting low income, first generation, primarily students of color, is beneficial to the mission. It also generates wealth through the designation of a minority serving institution. But within the RCM system, these campuses are penalized because there is no direct funneling through tuition to the big house that is Maine administration. Let's look at the labor side. Right now at Camden, we have a racialized disparity between the predominantly white faculty and the Black support staff labor force within a broader faculty structure that pays all Camden faculty less across the board. Diversity cluster hires exist, but they flow from central office down to campus bureaus with no local sovereignty. In fact, instigating competition between the entrepreneurial project of prevention services versus an underserved Africana Studies. Now, let's be clear. This is not an attack on the existing white faculty or the entrepreneurial services project. The point here is that there has been such a compression in faculty positions that the discussion should not be competition for scraps between various units. There should be an overall increase in faculty lines versus a fear of replacements. Equity must be the discussion here. So in a true DEI framework, public serving institutions that benefits from Rutgers is a public service institution that benefits from Camden's relationship with a struggling Black and brown community in terms of both branding and actual revenue. Rutgers should equitably distribute those rewards to the campuses that make these revenues and the reputation possible. This includes a greater share of local revenues to advance the mission of a minority serving institution. This also includes basic facility upgrades for libraries, classrooms, tech, and dormitories. This includes aggressive diversification and fair compensation of the Camden labor force across all sectors. This also includes a robust community engagement project that goes beyond tutoring and cleanup days to include scholarships, workforce and low-income housing on the campus, and food service programs. We throw away food every day because of health code violations, but during the pandemic, we saw all across the country that schools were packaging that food and turning it into healthy meals for communities of need. Why are we doing that as a normal standard of practice? At the end, this is not a matter of philanthropy or aid or do-gooderism. When we look at the broader economic structure of the Rutgers system, these are acts of reparations, of repair in alignment with the wealth extraction taken from peripheral campuses and used to bolster the prosperity of the central office. This is the town that Time magazine once said, who could live here? And yet communities do live here. People thrive here in the face of challenging conditions, and Rutgers Central Administration thrives off of this resilience of Camden campus workers, students, and communities that sustain them. The so-called debt of the Camden campus isn't an accident or the result of poor management practices. This austerity framework is an explicitly racialized business model used to generate unprecedented revenues off the backs of minority-serving campuses within impoverished Black and brown host cities. I've looked at these extractive relationships between Ivory Towers and chocolate cities at the local level, but Rutgers has scaled up this economic structure to a state-level university system between its predominantly white-serving main campus and its own minority-serving campuses at the periphery. It is abolition time. It's time to free us from these current conditions and imagine the university anew. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Davarian. You've given us so much to think about, and I kind of almost want to stay here for a second just to kind of unpack some of the ways you were breaking this down. But I want to move through the program and at this point introduce our next speaker. It's Jim Brown, my colleague, friend, associate professor of English and president of the Camden chapter of Rutgers AAUP-AFT. Jim.
So I have to follow that. So Dr. Baldwin, thank you so much. That was incredible. You said everything I would love to say with such clarity, and we're very lucky to have you here tonight. I will repeat just a little bit of what we just heard and maybe give just a slight bit of texture to it. As Keith said, we're colleagues in the English department. I'm also president of the Camden chapter of the Rutgers AAUP-AFT. And I want to just sort of reiterate what we just heard about how RCM sort of deals with funding and the budgeting of the Camden campus. As you just heard, once we sort of take account of the math of what the campus looks like after we take in, how many tuition dollars there are, Rutgers-Camden operates, brings in more than it spends, right? So it's no problem until a sort of large tens of millions of dollars are sucked back up to central administration for various sort of administrative projects. And that's a really sort of core thing to understand, in particular, given what we just heard about things like bridging the gap, which mean we end up as a campus being punished for not bringing in enough tuition dollars. I also want to point to another piece of this, which is a salary equity issue that many people think of as a faculty problem, but I really think of as a campus problem and potentially, and in addition, a student problem. That is a student equity problem, because faculty at Rutgers-Camden do a good bit of research with alongside students. This is something the university talks about a great deal in its sort of marketing materials. But the Camden College of Arts and Sciences faculty, as compared to the New Brunswick College of Arts and Sciences faculty, the salary differences are stark. The incoming tenure track faculty member average in the Camden College of Arts and Sciences makes 43% less than what is made in New Brunswick, right? So from the jump, there's a huge gap. And yet, we are all sort of teaching for the same university and all part of the same campus structure. So that problem then sort of persists over time as faculty members move up the chain, and that gap continues. So that is just one more piece of the equity issues raised by Keith, by Donna, by Dr. Baldwin. So given all of that, what our union has been fighting for is a series of demands, and what we will be fighting for is a series of demands that want us to think about canceling the debt that is continually foisted onto the Camden campus. A debt, by the way, that President Holloway said is a fiction when he was here just last week, that he said is not something that we should have to worry about, and that we should be thinking about investing in Camden. Those are his words. That we need to fix the funding model that continually imposes austerity on Camden. We need to respect the fact that Camden is a successful campus in providing college access and providing students with close working relationships with research faculty and a campus where they can get a world-class education. You heard it already. We need to diversify the faculty and the academic focus in Camden. We need to bring the faculty in line with what the students, the demographics look like. But more than that, we need to think about providing programs that sort of reimagine the focus of the academic enterprise in Camden. And then finally, equal pay for equal work, which is pretty, you've seen the sort of stark numbers that we're dealing with in Camden. So I just want to, once again, I want to thank Keith and Donna for putting this event together. I'm happy to be a part of it. Super thankful to Dr. Baldwin for giving us the context that he did. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Jim. And thank you for all of your hard work as chapter president in Camden. Our next speaker is Tania Martinez. She is a graduating senior at Rutgers University in Camden with a triple major in global studies, philosophy, and political science. She is president of College Democrats and the Immigrant Justice Association and a digital studies student researcher.
Hi, everyone. First, thank you all for having me. I'm super excited to be able to speak with you all today. And the reason that I really wanted to make sure to speak out is because at the end of the day, you all are here for students, right? And so I think that it's important to hear about not just my story, but all the other students. They need to be able to feel free to amplify their own voices. I don't think students are there. I think oftentimes minority students come from parents that have instituted into us this idea that we can't speak out, that we can't actually talk about what issues we're having, that we're lucky to even be here. And that's the mentality that I had going in, the mentality that going to college, I'm lucky if I graduate. And I look at the numbers in terms of my family. At the end of the day, I have 6 other siblings, and only 2 of them have graduated from a 4-year college, and none of them did it in 4 years. And that's just the realities of my parents didn't go to college. My aunts, uncles, very few of my cousins, I think maybe just 1 or 2. So I'm lucky to be here. Why am I going to complain? How am I entitled to that? But the reality is that we aren't treated fairly. We aren't treated as people that are valued, as students that are valued, yet we're doing all these incredible things, and we're paying all this money, yet we're not seeing it. And so in particular, I think one thing that I think is really important is the facilities at Rutgers-Camden. I used to live in the dorms, and when I was living in the dorms, there would be so many issues that were just so surprising to me. They even moved me before I even moved in to a different room, right? Like the day before I was supposed to move in, because mine had mold. And so that was one instance. And then another instance where there was a sink of ours that was broken. We kept reporting it. And for months, it didn't get fixed until it got to a point where it was just the water spewed, and it would continue to spew anytime it rained into my room. And then my things would get wet. I had my guitar, I had to clean it. And that's what I had to undergo. And then, the housing is all filled up. And so my freshman year, I was in a room that was really tiny, smaller than the room I'm in now, with 2 other people. And that's just ridiculous to me that there isn't enough housing for students that can't live from home. And in particular, I think that there's also the problems of the facilities when we're in class. During COVID, a lot of students needed ventilation in their classrooms that just didn't exist. Some students were immunocompromised in a crowded room, and they were uncomfortable, but they had no other option but to go to class, or else they fail. That isn't fair to students. We deserve more. We deserve something for our health. And that was just so frustrating to be hearing from students, especially because friends of mine are immunocompromised, and I'm worried about them having to go and being forced to go to school. And then I first heard stories about students who, were told library can't stay open longer. For students, that's the only way they can get work done. They may come from a household that's overcrowded, and then they're forced to be doing their homework in their cars. There are Rutgers-Camden students every day that have to go home after the library closes and just do their homework in their cars because they have nowhere else to go. Yet New Brunswick has a library that's open 24 hours. You can't give that same support to students who come from these backgrounds of overcrowded houses. That's just the reality of students. And the other thing that I wanted to mention as well is that, we have a lot of, the food courts that end up not servicing the cultures, the variety of cultures that we have on our campus. In particular, I've heard a lot of students talk about how they have to go to the halal cart because it's their only option. The food doesn't service it, yet we brag about how we are so proud of the various cultures and identities, yet we're not supporting them in what they're going to eat. And the other thing is that for me, I'm Hispanic, and my culture really matters to me. And I haven't had many Hispanic professors. In fact, my first one that is from a Latinx country is just this semester, and that's my first one. And I did the numbers because I was interested and curious. Throughout my time at Rutgers-Camden, I've had a lot of the same professors, but in total, I've had 35 professors, and only 4 of them were from the BIPOC community. Percentage-wise, that's 11%. It really shouldn't be the case in that instance. And so that's just something that to me matters, yet I'm not seeing it. I come from a place where I don't really have a lot of role models that are Latinx that are in the same path that I'm in. A lot of people don't have that on campus. And I think that's just something that a lot of students are missing too. We are coming from first generation. We're not being supported as students. And finally, I think that students should feel like they matter too. Whenever I talk to other students, they're kind of ashamed to go to Rutgers-Camden. And I'm an out-of-state student. I'm from Arkansas. So I was excited to be here. I chose Rutgers-Camden because of how committed they are to the community, of how committed faculty and staff are, of how committed and how many amazing things students are doing. I chose Rutgers-Camden intentionally. And when I got here, everyone was just like, why are you here? Rutgers-Camden, really? Are you sure you didn't confuse it with New Brunswick? That was the reaction I got. And that's how students perceive themselves. They feel like they're not as good because they go to Rutgers-Camden, yet that isn't the case. I feel lucky to be here. I love my campus. I love how committed everyone is to the community, to learning. There's so much good here, yet we're not recognized for it. And in fact, we're kind of taught to be ashamed. So I really would like to change that. And I really want to, if there's any other students here, I really want to encourage you all to speak up too, because I think it's really important. And I'll continue to encourage students and peers of mine as well to speak up.
Thanks so much, Tanya. I mean, I really applaud you for being so brave and eloquent to come forward and talk about your experiences at Rutgers-Camden. When I was a student at Camden High School, I remember being a senior in Camden High School and kind of hearing folks say, I'm going this place, I'm going that place, but I'm not going to Rutgers-Camden, not knowing kind of what a gem we had in our own backyard. So I totally agree with you. Also want to give Alan an opportunity to share a video Tanya had shared with me earlier about her sophomore year experience in the dorms. And so Alan, if you could share that now so we could just see a bit of what she was talking about.
Can you guys help? Because I have no idea how to do this. Oh my god. Okay, how do we do this? What do we do? Just tell me what to do. All right. Oh my god.
Underneath, and
All
there's
right.
a knob supposedly.
Oh my god, how do I? All right.
Right, so we can actually see there, right, the conditions that she's talking about. And I think this is representative of a larger problem with infrastructure and material resources for the Camden campus. So again, thank you so much, Tanya. Yeah. So at this point, I'm actually gonna take over the floor and do my 5-minute piece. And then from there, we'll go to attorney Maisha Aziz. So I wanna speak a little bit about the most recent designation of Rutgers-Camden as an MSI. And that simply means minority serving institution. And I want to talk about 3 ways in which this designation is important, right? But also it can be a trap, right? And so I want to think through 3 ways in which we need to kind of think about this MSI designation, minority serving institution, right? In 3 important ways. I want to call for 1, diversifying the faculty, 2, decolonizing the curriculum, and then 3, decolonizing graduate study, right? And I think some of these things have been said before, but I want to kind of put like a finer point on them, right? So I can speak directly to my own department, right, in terms of questions of diversity. When I first got to Rutgers-Camden in 2008, I was the only Black faculty member, right? There are now 2 of us, okay? So we can do backflips and cartwheels over that, right? There are more people of color than 2, but still, right, the department is majority white, overwhelmingly white. When we look at kind of campus numbers, and I'll go back as far as, let's say, 2018 roughly, right? African-American faculty in terms of tenure track, full-time faculty, make up about 5%, right, of the Camden tenure track faculty. Latinx faculty will get you about 3%, right? But our student numbers, right, as this most recent MSI designation tells us, right, are much higher when it comes to these types of racial and ethnic diversity. Some people kind of argue about the numbers, but African-American students at Rutgers-Camden hovered somewhere around 16 to 17%, right? Latinx students, somewhere around 15 to 16% as well, right? So we would have to really triple, in some cases even quadruple, right, the numbers of BIPOC faculty to get to the levels, right, of our undergraduate student population, right? And at the rate that we're going, we're not gonna double or triple or quadruple anything, right? If anything, we're losing BIPOC faculty almost on a yearly basis, right? So we have to really consider kind of seriously how we're hiring, who we're hiring, and what those hiring numbers mean if we are to be an MSI institution. That designation, I should also note, triggers a set of funding protocols in terms of providing support and resources for our students. But if those resources aren't being put to giving our students the faculty members and the concentrations that they need, then that's not going to work, right? That's not going to help and advance our cause. To that same point about diversifying faculty, I also want to add that although there's diversity hiring money, right, which has come down to Rutgers-Camden, and we all saw the announcements last year about a pool of money being available for diversity hiring, what's happening on our campus is that because there are so many needs with the regular hiring process, what's actually happening is that folks aren't even able to hire on a regular basis. And so therefore, diversity hiring is simply being used to do the work of regular hiring, right? And this is a real problem. So you can't begin to kind of create community, create diversity hiring cohorts if regular hiring is not a system that's already in place, right? So that's the way in which diversity hiring is not even a solution to the problem, because we're so underfunded that we can't even do, right, a regular hiring process. Another response to the MSI designation has to be decolonizing the curriculum, right? Fixing the academic focus. And I'm going to mention two different ways to do that, but these are only two. Really, the larger solutions that every single department needs to think about the ways in which it's upholding white supremacy, right? That's the short answer, right? Like, how do we decolonize the curriculum? Every single department has to take responsibility for the ways in which its faculty hiring, its curriculum, right, is upholding white supremacy. And if we're not doing that, then we're not doing the work that's going to advance the ball down the field. So two ways in which this needs to be done. For the entire School of Arts and Sciences, right, there's not one full-time researcher, teacher, right, whose focus is the African continent, right? We have not one full-time Africanist, right, within the Rutgers-Camden School of Arts and Sciences, right? That is a shame, right? That is a tragedy, right? For all of the talented people, scholars that we have on our campus, not one full-time Africanist. And the question becomes, what kind of message does that send to our student body, right? What kind of message does that send to ourselves? But we don't have the time or the resources, right, to dedicate, right, to Africa. And so this is a problem which involves, right, decolonizing the curriculum. In the Department of World Languages, the only languages which are taught are French, German, and Spanish. Now, just this weekend, I was finishing co-hosting a conference called Black Germany and Beyond. So I don't want to kind of give the misimpression that I think that, you know, French, German, and Spanish are not spoken by people of African descent, by BIPOC folks. Clearly, all these languages have connections to and implications for BIPOC folk. But they call themselves the Department of World Languages. I think it might better be called the Department of European Languages, because that's what French, German, and Spanish are in terms of their roots, right? So we can't continue to advance the same kind of neo-colonial plantation curriculum, right? We need a curriculum that speaks to the desires, the needs, the talents of our student body. When students come to our campus and they speak African languages, those can't even be acknowledged on our campus because we have no one to actually assess them, right? No department that actually works to honor their legitimacy and their talents. Thirdly, then, I want to talk about decolonizing graduate study. And so the MSI designation really applies to our undergraduate student body. As I noted before, we're very diverse racially and ethnically when it comes to our undergraduate student body. When it comes to our graduate student body, I think just the opposite is the case. If we're an MSI when it comes to our undergraduates, we're definitely a PWI when it comes to our graduate students. And I can't speak to campus-wide numbers except for kind of anecdotal experience, but I'll speak to the department that I know best, which is my own, English and Communication. A few years ago, I did a study of our English department graduate program, our MA program in particular. And from 2008 to 2018, let's say we had anywhere from 30 to 50 graduate students for every single year, right? So 2008, 2018, any given year, we had about 30 to 50 graduate students in our MA program. In any given year that you would pick, we had at most 3 African-American graduate students. And oftentimes it was simply one, right? In any given year that you would select between 2008 and 2018, we would have exactly 1 Latinx student, right? That's a crying shame. And so although we have this MSI designation, we should not be fooled that those numbers apply to our undergraduate population, but not to the graduate population. And so diversifying graduate study has to be a central component of making sure that our campus is truly racially and ethnically diverse. All right. So I want to now go to, I think, Donna, do you want to introduce our next speaker?
Here we go. Sorry, I was muted and was unable to unmute myself. Our next 2 speakers are Reet, Starwind, and Ayinde Merrill. They'll be splitting their time. Reet is a multimedia artist, storyteller, and alumnus of Rutgers University Camden in digital media and society. He is the creative director of Watu Moja, a nonprofit that seeks to connect African-American and Afro-Latino youth to the people and cultures of the global African community. Ayinde Merrill is a 2019 graduate of Rutgers University Camden in Africana Studies, who is currently completing a master's in public administration at University of Pennsylvania. He is also the president of Watu Moja, a nonprofit that connects to African American and Afro-Latino youth. Reet, would you like to get us started?
Absolutely. Firstly, it's an honor to be here. I was a part of Freedom School, and to just hear Dr. Green and Dr. Brown's voices. It's been since I was a student that I really got to interact with the both of them. And this conversation is very important. It's very near and dear to our heart. And with the limited time I have, I really just would like to share my experience going through college and Rutgers in particular, and about the kind of challenges that are posed to a student like me that aren't necessarily even considered or thought upon by a staff like the one that's currently at Rutgers. And so I come from a Black and Latinx background, a single parent household. Mom works to pay for most things. And while I had done 2 years at Camden County College, I was able to work in the local mall to raise enough money while I was in school to pay for all of my classes. That price is a little bit steeper going from CCC to Rutgers, which is an obstacle in itself. But the blessing I had received is that my mother's company had UMDMJ had merged with Rutgers, and with her being a Rutgers employee, I can now attend Rutgers and get my 4-year degree. And it was really just there that the work-life balance started to feel a little too heavy, because I'm still a person who has to work in order to pay for my life expenses. I was relying on public transportation at the time. And I can't really compare with the students who have the opportunity to drive cars up and down the highway and pay for a parking pass to really have those extra hours in the day to do things. And the one particular challenge that I had faced towards the end of my tenure at Rutgers was that I had enrolled myself in a study abroad course, and the rest of my courses up until this point have been paid for with tuition remission, which I had needed considering my financial background at home. The unfortunate thing was that what had slipped through the cracks was that there was a portion of the money that I was supposed to pay in order to take this trip. And that information just wasn't conveyed to me until, unfortunately, after I had taken the course and taken the trip. So I remember doing the Wakanda salute with Dr. Green on stage at graduation. I took a week trip to Ireland with a group of students. It was a wonderful course, and it was a great trip. It was actually my experience with the Ayinde traveling with Watu Moja that had led me to be in a position of leadership during that trip, because I'm familiar with being the fish out of water in a different country and just kind of looking after the other students who hadn't done that before. But what's awaiting for me when I come home isn't my diploma. It's a $3,000 bill for a trip that I was supposed to pay for. And to put that in perspective, $3,000 isn't a ton of money to probably some of the people in this room. But at the time, I'm working at the local mall and I'm making $9,000 in a year altogether. And so to be hit with the bill unexpectedly and not be able to pay it, and then for it to progress to the point where Rutgers' law firm was actively suing me, and I was losing money that I had saved for me to, start to progress and start a career and move out of my house back to the school that was supposed to, advance me forward. So I came to Rutgers and I'd learned so much that allowed me to do the things that I'm doing now. I'm currently curating and directing an animated series that entails visual and written art and music, and it's wonderful. And it's just slightly frustrating to understand that the expectation on me as a student of Rutgers was to have a certain amount of money to be able to pay something like a $3,000 fee that's unexpected. And this story isn't uncommon, I don't think. And I think that we need, in the sense of student equity, some transparency there about the people like me who are just kind of caught in the middle of a system that isn't necessarily built for them. And while I can't succeed in a system like that, some changes will need it in order so that students like me can exceed in the future.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you for having me here. Reet and I, we go back a long time. We're beneficiaries of Rutgers, and really did change our lives in certain ways. I transferred from Stockton University to Rutgers University because of the Africana Studies program. So yeah, again, my name is Ayinde Merrill. I'm a Camden native. I'm an instructor at Rutgers Future Scholars as well. And Rutgers has played a major part in my development as intellectual, as a person. And Dr. Green just kind of wanted me to talk about the organization that Reet and I kind of founded and how Rutgers very much shaped what we are. So Watu Moja was founded in 2014. It means one people in Swahili, and it's a youth and young adult leadership development through service learning organization. And some of the founders, Reet and I and a few others, I serve as the president, and Reet also serves as the creative director. Our mission simply is just, our mission is to connect Afro, Latino, and African American youth to the peoples and cultures of the African community, both within the African continent and diaspora. Some of Watu Moja's initiatives are, doing a full-scale basketball court in Nairobi, Kenya, working with villagers in Gatenga to secure water tanks, giving microloans to women empowerment groups in Kenya as well. But our ground projects are only a vehicle to establish our ultimate goal in establishing a meaningful relationship of mutual regard, love, and cooperation among Black youth and Afro-Latino youth globally. Our vocation is taking us to various lands in connecting Black and Brown people together. It's the Galagichi Nation and the St. Helena Islands, Nairobi, Kenya, Guatemala, Dominican Republic, and Haiti. And we have a goal to scale and widen our gap. And locally, our community focus is curating and promoting safe spaces for expression, cultural exchange, and cultural learning for Black and Brown people. Watu Moja, an organization that seeks to obtain equality in all the spaces we are present in, and none more evident than in our 2020 protest and service learning projects. We were leading demands to the Camden County Police Department, white and highly militarized police force that's occupy and brutalize our city, where over 400 youth from Camden came to have their voices heard in the fight for a right to demand how they want their communities to be taken. But so much of the ideologies and practices observed by Watu Moja are a direct result of the Africana Studies program here at Rutgers University. It drastically shaped my Black consciousness. It decolonialized my worldview. Like I said, I transferred from Stockton University to Rutgers because of the Africana Studies program. It was Professor Wayne Glasker's African American history class. It was Dr. Kevin Washington, who traveled all the way from DC once a week to teach a Black psychology course. It was Dr. Green's African American literature course. It was Dr. Katrina Hazard's class on Baldwin and her class on Du Bois. It was Dr. Ziad's course on reparation and restoration. It was Patrick Rosal's course on poetry and performance that totally pushed me to re-examine and expand what's possible for Black people and our ability to transform space for our benefit. And in addition, what we have already and what we are offering to the intellectual space that is often so diminished for some reason when it comes to Black studies and Black voices. We don't get that same regard and respect in the intellectual space. But their teaching and guidance properly prepared me to be accepted to the University of Pennsylvania, where I graduated in May with my master's in public administration. So I'm just forever grateful for the Black faculty and staff at Rutgers University. And I'm just one example. It reaches another example why Black studies need to be protected, why Camden teachers need to be paid their fair share, and why Camden campus should receive equitable funding as well. So I just thank you all for fighting a good fight and just being there for people of color like me and some of the students that have already taught. Because when I was at Stockton University, I had one person of color while I was there. And it was, when I came to Rutgers University, I tell people all the time, transferring from Stockton University to Rutgers University Camden was one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life, just because of the deep, deep connections and relationships that I bonded there. So just thank you for all who are here and all who are going to speak. So thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Ayinde and Reet. I miss you guys both. Wakanda forever. Always.
Wakanda forever.
All right, I just want to introduce our last speaker before we open it up to Q&A. And and that's Maisha Aziz. Maisha Aziz is an attorney and retired judge, as well as founder of the Aziz Law Group, which specializes in estate administration and real estate. She is active in the leadership of the NAACP and Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. She's also an alumnus of RUC, who currently teaches business law at Rutgers University in Camden. Professor Aziz, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Peace and blessings. Thank you for that, Dr. Green. As Dr. Green said, my name is Maisha Aziz. I am the class of 94. And just to piggyback on the previous speaker's experience at Rutgers-Camden, having a very close-knit family in terms of students and faculty of color, I like to say that Rutgers-Camden is my Hillman tradition. For those of you who are old enough to remember a different world, my grandmother graduated from Rutgers-Camden with her bachelor's and her master's. So did my mother, and then it was myself. So Rutgers-Camden holds a very special place in my heart. I received my JD from Temple University, and I am now the state advisor for the New Jersey NAACP, and I'm also on the National Youth Committee for the NAACP, and I'm very active in my sorority where I do social action, political awareness, and we've been focusing on redistricting this year. Again, like the previous speaker said with Dr. Glasker, Dr. Hazard Gordon, I didn't have Dr. Green when I was on campus, but the African-American professors there 100% shaped who I am today. We also had African-American deans. We had Dean Parker, Dean Muse, Dean Riggs, and those African-American faculty at Rutgers-Camden were instrumental to students of color, African-American students, feeling like they were at home on campus. So Dr. Green asked me to also talk to you about the kinds of things that I did on campus when I was a student. So I started the Muslim Student Association. I was the first president. Excuse me, I apologize. I was also the founder of the National Association of Black Accountants. But on campus, we were always involved in activism. The Rodney King verdict came out when I was an undergrad. I remember staging a rally on the front steps of the Student Center to discuss that. I remember being in front of the flagpole in front of the Student Center to make sure that we had a Black History Month flag that went up during Black History Month, and different rallies surrounding that when I was there. And so my campus life at 4 years at Rutgers-Camden was very active in terms of trying to make sure that things changed for the next generations. Right now, my activism includes empowering youth. We've already been approached by a group of students at Rutgers-Camden who want to start an NAACP chapter there. So we're so excited. We already have one at Rutgers New Brunswick. Rutgers Newark wants to start one as well. I apologize. And so my job really consists of empowering, motivating, and educating and inspiring young people to make a change and to help them learn the tools to make that change and to make an effective change. And so I enjoy that. We have conferences, we have meetings in order to help the students gain leadership skills and help them make a change in the community. The main thing that we do, in addition to leadership skills, is making sure that everyone is involved in the community. So before COVID, when Rutgers had an MLK Day of Service, I made sure that our NAACP members were involved in the MLK Day of Service. We're involved with Urban Promise. We work with them. We really make sure that the youth are involved in the community. I think that is it in terms of what I have been asked to speak about. In terms of my fight for equity amongst African Americans in our local community, The fight really has been, like I said, to give tools to people to make sure they understand the tools that are in place. So for instance, redistricting was a big thing this past year. And so we helped mobilize young people to attend redistricting legislative commissions and to provide testimony. And they provided so much testimony that the members of the legislative commission acknowledged them and thanked them and told them that they were proud of them for all the work that they've been doing. The videos of their testimony can be seen on the legislative websites, and that's where it is forever. As a professor, I would say, how do I contribute to making sure that there is an equitable environment is in my teaching style. So I make sure that what I teach is relevant and I make sure that it's inclusive. So anything that I use, any learning tools that I use, I make sure that the visuals represent the people in the class. I make sure that the students know that, hey, I literally was just a student like you. I was in Armitage. I was probably in this exact classroom taking a class, and you can see the progression of myself and other alum of Rutgers University. When I was on the bench, we wanted to make sure all judges have to make sure that we follow the statutes and we follow common sense in terms of making sure that the outcomes are the same across the board, regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic status. I believe I have hit all the topics I've been asked to discuss. If I missed anything, please feel free to ask me in the Q&A. Dr. Green, is there anything else you would like me to touch on?
No, thank you so much, Maisha. That was awesome. Thank you so much, Professor Aziz. And I think you bring up a really good point when it comes to also thinking about, decolonizing assessment, right? Decolonizing the way that we teach. And so there are ways in which instruction itself, the content can be conscious, or the conscious can be, connected to people of African descent or BIPOC folk, but the way you're communicating it or teaching it can also be problematic as well. And so I love that you mentioned that in your comments
And Dr.
well.
Green, can I mention this exact thing? And I'm glad you said that. It made me remember when I was a freshman at Rutgers and I took Intro to Sociology, and the textbook said, when you are interviewing a Black man, do not expect him to look you in the eye. Do not expect him to look at you in the face. Expect a Black man to slouch. This was in my sociology textbook, to slouch in the chair. Do not expect Black people to be on time. There was a whole discussion about CPT time in the Intro to Sociology book. And I had to approach my professor and I said, this isn't appropriate. And so I'm giving this example to piggyback off what you said about being a conscientious professor, but also to encourage youth, right, to have this discussion with their professors, even people like you and I. If you're uncomfortable with what's being taught, you need to convey that. And I couldn't believe that in 1990, there was a textbook, that was given to me and other people to learn about the way that Black men are going to look in an interview. And when I approached him, he said, well, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. Nobody's reading it anyway. So, that's an issue. And I think especially with professors of color, when we get material to teach, we need to figure out how to incorporate it. Because sometimes even the teaching style, like they commented about standardized tests, right? Standardized tests are not for everyone, especially the way that they're taught. And so we need to infuse what's going on in our community and our society to make it relevant for us and to make college a safe place to discuss the issues that college students are having, racially and with identification, because if not in a college campus, in a college classroom, where else? I apologize if I went over my time, Dr. Green. It just reminded me of that one incident. I'll never forget that.
No, I think it's a really profound one. I think you're totally right that when students speak up, the administration listens, deans listen, chairs listen. So we have to kind of keep on encouraging our students. And as Tanya was noting, oftentimes they come from backgrounds where they're not encouraged to speak up, but certainly your voice matters. So at this point, thank you so much again, Professor Aziz. I want to invite Davarian to kind of come in and provide some commentary, but also open up the Q&A as well.
Thank you so much, Keith, and thank you for both the student speakers and the alumni speakers for conveying, and adding texture to the history and the experiences of people that have experienced the beauty and the power, and sometimes the tragedy of being a student at Rutgers-Camden that need to be rectified immediately. I'm gonna be really brief here, and I mentioned about abolition time and about, and reparations time, time to repair the current conditions. And you might say, well, what does that mean? I gave a couple of examples about, housing and food and curriculum. And I just want you to understand that this is something that's within our grasp, that through my Smart Cities Lab and through other people that are on this call, we know that there are people that are organized, that are mobilized, that are understanding campuses as vital sites of struggle. I've worked with New Haven Rising in New Haven, Connecticut to force Yale University to pay. It's a coalition of students, community members, and faculty, and local politicians to force Yale to pay its fair share. And so the point here is that they were able to get Yale to offer an additional $10 million a year for the property taxes they weren't paying. Right now, to your immediate south, working with the Black Belt, the Black Bottom Tribe in West Philadelphia to push against Yale, Penn and Drexel and the hospital from bulldozing over all the last remnants of affordable housing that's hanging on for dear life in the face of a 60-year battle with the University City Corporation that was spearheaded by Penn to make that area around the university a prosperity zone for medical, tech, investors, luxury housing, and they brought that to full fruition, and now we're pushing back. But the most important thing about this is that the degree to which all these campaigns see that there must be a coalition that matches the reach that higher education has into our lives. It must include students. It must include alumni. It must include residents. It must include doctors and graduate students as laborers and residents. That in this current moment, higher education, schools are the biggest employers, real estate holders, policers, and healthcare providers, not just on the campus, but in our cities. So just imagine if those who are being subjected to inequity in those regions, in those areas come together, what transformation happens on campus is going to transform democracy more broadly. And to the last point, to speak to what Keith is talking about, this is all rooted in a tradition of Black studies. We think about Black studies as being parochial, as being just for Black people. But the model that I'm talking about, this vision of reorienting, of transforming higher education, is directly rooted in the liberation struggles that came out of the origins of Black studies that Professor Murch talks about with the Black Panther Party at Merritt College in Oakland, California, transforming, engaging on that space. Then we moved to places like Malcolm X Community College, City College in New York City, this groundswell of idea, this belief that students can come together with community residents to offer or fight for open admissions, to talk about diversity of curriculum, diversification of faculty, but also to decriminalize and demilitarize their police. Also, to have abroad programs to go to Cuba. Also, to have food programs for the homeless and the unhoused in their communities. Also, to have prison annexes of learning for incarcerated residents. These ideas came out of Black studies in the 1960s and have been bulldozed by the entrepreneurial university vision, and we need to revive them right now. And this is not a matter of trying to imagine a new university as much as it is about recovering the vision of higher education that was instituted by Black studies. We can do that. If it's in our grasp, we need to mobilize and organize today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Baldwin. It really tied together so many elements and threads. And many thanks to all of our speakers who've given us an amazing portrait of the many different parts and facets of Rutgers-Camden and the importance that universities be focused on their true mission, which is public service, teaching, and research. Not real estate corporations, not accumulators of profit, not simply jobs providers for highly paid administrators. It's these core missions that have really transformed people's lives, and that we need to fight for the Rutgers that we deserve. So with that, I'd like to open it up We ask that if you want to ask a question, type stack into the chat. And if you're having trouble do that, you could also just put up your hand, raise your Zoom hand. So we'll take as many questions as we can. We're looking forward to hearing from you. This is not a traditional academic event. It's a freedom school, which means that it is always a dialogue. So hearing from you is in many ways the most important part of the evening. It looks like we have Giovanna on stack.
Hi, thank you so much to our speakers. This was phenomenal, really. And I feel like I learned so much. My question relates to some of the work that we're doing in the Climate Justice Committee of the union. And I'm really interested, and I'll talk a little bit about our work and plug it here, but I'm really interested in how the attempts to build equity for the Camden campus intersect with broader community organizing efforts, particularly since Camden has such a history of environmental justice issues, and there's so much dynamic organizing happening here. So in particular, our committee is chaired by David Hughes, who's on tonight, but we're organizing around a lot of really important issues and working with the Waterfront South and Cooper Grant neighborhoods to build cooperatively owned solar panels on Rutgers roofs and canopies, thinking about how we can leverage Rutgers land to support community benefits through lower energy costs, which is particularly important for the tax exemption reasons that Professor Baldwin talked about. And we're working to build this into a resilience hub with refrigeration and energy charging and electric shuttles to serve as mobile resilience hubs to the local neighborhoods because of the vulnerability that Camden faces due to flooding and weather events, particularly under climate change, which is, of course, a really intersectional and important issue. And so obviously, if you're interested, please reach out. But I just wanted to further the conversation about how we can connect the equity organizing around Rutgers-Camden to these broader ongoing community efforts, a lot of which focus around environmental justice issues and are deeply important to reparations work. Thank you.
And we'll leave this open to the panel, anyone who would like to respond.
I'll just say real briefly that the points you raised, Giovanna, are critical because I've seen them happen in real time. When you combine issues around sustainability with issues of equity and racial justice and social justice more broadly, transformative things can happen. So I spent time at the University of Winnipeg in Canada, and they put together a sustainability campaign that was not just about LEED certified buildings, but it included the cultural, the political, and the economic. So what that meant for them was not just solar panels, which is an amazing thing. It also meant community gardens on campus buildings. It also meant the conversion of exclusively student housing into mixed community and student housing at multiple price points, from premium to affordable to rent geared to income, where the premium rate housing underwrote the other housing, and except for the balconies on the premium housing, the other housing was interchangeable. You couldn't tell the difference what kind of housing you were in. This also meant that they fired one of the major multinational food service companies, Aramark, Tedesco, Chartwell's, Merrill, you know all the names, you know, that charge exorbitant rates for horrible food. They created their own food system called Diversity Foods, where 70% of their employees come from what they call difficult to employ communities, LGBTQ, recently incarcerated, single mother, new Canadian, what we call immigrant communities. And they're moving from wages to include profit sharing. On the food source side, what they're doing is that 65% of their raw materials come from local farms from within a 100-kilometer radius. They have composting bins next to every workstation, and they convert their cooking oil into biodiesel. This is a small example, but this is what happens at a level when you combine racial justice with what we think of sometimes as kind of white ideas about sustainability or environmentalism. It transformed the entire campus, and it really is in service to the city in which it sits. So I think that the things that you already mentioned you're doing in Camden, combined with some of the things I've seen elsewhere, could lead to something that's powerfully transformational. So thanks for your comment.
I think that we have Sherry Wolf on stack.
Okay, sorry, we've got organizers working against ourselves. Thanks so much. First of all, I just want to say to, I think it's Reet and Ayinde and Tanya and Maisha, you're all kind of like walking ambassadors for how great Rutgers-Camden is. Everything you said was an education to a lot of us who are not there, and thank you. You just, you're really, you've made such a contribution to this discussion. I want to ask of Dr. Baldwin for you to talk a little bit more about examples that you know of. You've cited examples at Yale and at Penn. We're talking about a state university, a public institution, a unionized institution, in which not just Camden is a site of racialized wealth extraction, but of course, Newark, another majority Black city, being gentrified rapidly. What took Harlem 25, 30 years is now happening in Newark and, like this. And then New Brunswick, which, as you mentioned before, a largely Latino working class city in which Latinos being, driven out of the downtown. And of course, we were part of, this union was a proud part of the battle to save Lincoln Annex, but that battle lost largely, although we did make gains. They're not in a brown site anymore. But I wanted to hear some examples of how this kind of solidarity was built to challenge that. And I want to raise something that I know for a lot of the faculty needs to be said. We have to talk about it. It's the elephant in the living room at Rutgers. This is all happening. It didn't start from him and from this administration, but this was, this is a long history. But it is now occurring for the first time under a largely Black and brown administration, and they surely will and do use that when we're talking about, a workforce of the faculty, at least, that is disproportionately a white faculty. So I was wondering if you can give some of those examples, talk about some of those rich histories that you've written about. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I definitely don't want to monopolize the A part of the Q&A, but I will be brief in terms of it's important to understand, as many of you are students of social movements, New Haven Rising is a 30-year-old social movement. It didn't just happen overnight. It was a combination of, series of campaigns. It was labor, it was Unite Here, and before that, hospital workers. One of the key things that reminds me of the Camden case is that Yale has had New Haven is a relatively small city. And because of that, Yale has had such an overwhelming power over the city of New Haven in so many areas of life. As I mentioned before, policing, the Yale PD has jurisdiction over the entire city of New Haven. Most of the labor organizers that work at Unite Here are employed by Yale. So a significant portion of the property that's controlled in New Haven is owned by Yale. So it was in ways the degree to which Yale had pervaded so many facets of New Haven's life that actually became, in some ways, it's becoming its own downfall, because the reach of the university, those who have been subject to that reach began to see the connections with each other and began to see a common enemy and mobilize against it. And so towards the end of the campaign, they saw my book, they reached out to me. We, did op-eds, we did rallies, we nailed, feces onto the door of the president, in a Martin Luther-esque style. And it's been very, very, very powerful because Yale had nowhere to run. They were this global campaign, this global campus, but everywhere they turned in their own local spaces, there was New Haven Rising. Local alders, local politicians, like the aldermen and women, were also a part of the campaign. And so it was a powerful movement. Right now, another public school, Berkeley, UC Berkeley, in the state constitution in California, the state universities, the upper tier of the universities, they have the power to override the housing policies, things like rent control in municipalities locally. So as part of their entrepreneurial vision, UC Berkeley bought a rent control building. And once they bought it, that triggered an override over rent stabilization. And they converted it into luxury housing targeted towards international and out-of-state students. And so right now there's a Save Berkeley neighborhood that includes lawsuits, grassroots mobilizing. I'll be there in April trying to ramp up the mobilization to include students. Because what we see and what Black history, what Black studies has told us is that if these campaigns are not organized with the various sectors that are influenced, that benefit, that the university plunders to extract and produces wealth, they fail. If it's just about faculty governance, it fails. If it's just about pilots in terms of taxes, it fails. It has to be a comprehensive vision that takes into account all the ways in which the university sees its power from these various constituencies in the surrounding areas, in terms of workers, in terms of residents, in terms of the brand and prestige of the alumni, in terms of the fundraising, in terms of the private partnerships with investors and graduate workers. And so it has to encompass all these things for success, I think, to happen in a robust and sustainable way. So I hope that helps begin the conversation. But you can talk about, I mean, there's so many things that are going right now with all the strike wave of graduate students all over the country, with Columbia being the prime example of the groundwork of the United Campus Workers across the Southern right to work states, stadium stompers a couple of years ago around Temple University, the nationwide network of cops off campus. So we have these local phenomena, but now I hope that I can help and we can help become the connective tissue to bring all of these local conditions and local visions to a national framework that matches the way in which university professors, I'm not professors, but presidents and administrators meet at national conventions. We need national convenings that match the way they meet and share stories and swap strategies. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Baldwin. And I would also invite, because we're quickly coming to a close, other people on the panel, if you would like to respond to the themes and the issues that were raised. I can get us started. And I think Professor Baldwin's remarks are so important, and us going and thinking about how to build these true bonds of solidarity, that solidarity is something that has to be built. It's not just a feeling or an action, you know, it's an active process, and it has to bring together all 100,000 of us. So the 50,000 undergraduates, the 20,000 graduate students, and the 30,000 workers, of which a portion are faculty, some with tenure track and tenure, some contingent. But it has to be a vision of one people, one Rutgers. One point I would take back, thinking about how to go back to the 1960s and Dr. Baldwin's really important points about the power of Black studies, that in some ways, you know, when we're thinking about the neoliberal university, it has become normal to us that education is commodified, that even the wealthiest people are still literally bribing people with in some cases, over $1 million of donations to get their children access. This idea of manufactured scarcity of education and its hyper commodification has become normal to us. And I think that the COVID-19 pandemic and the crisis that it created in higher education, with 700,000 workers losing their jobs and enormous numbers of families being unable to send their children to school, this crisis for us is also an opportunity to build the kinds of strong, broad coalitions, and to remember that in our recent past, 50 years ago, we had tuition-free universities. So some of the largest and most prestigious universities in the United States, the University of California system, CUNY in New York, that there is a long tradition of a university that is actually meant to be a public good and that's meant to serve its own communities. And that Black and brown students at CUNY and at UC Berkeley and at Merritt College, where the Panthers were formed, they fought to open up these universities and say, we all should have access. So sometimes it feels like an uphill battle, but in our very recent past, we've had incredible victories, and we need to look to those. Other thoughts of people on the panel as we move towards our close?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of just reinforce the point that was made beautifully about, you know, making sure to articulate the questions and issues that are facing Camden City, like along with Rutgers-Camden, right? And I think one prime example of that is that recently our chancellor put out a, you know, what to call a white paper or several initiatives that he calls 15 and 5. So 15, you know, points of progress to be made in 5 years, which I guess is when he'll be leaving. At any rate, one of those points was articulating a internship program where students at Rutgers-Camden could then work in the mayor's office. And we knew that in terms of Camden city politics, the mayor's office has not had power in decades, right? And so what does it mean to kind of put our students in a position where they'll be working at Rutgers-Camden and then transferring over to Camden city politics without a really critical sense of what Camden politics actually looks like? So those are the type of ways in which our kind of campus demands and city demands and city issues are really closely interconnected. And I think giving our students the ability to kind of really think through carefully what's happening in Camden City is really a mandate in terms of a proper Rutgers-Camden education. So I just want to kind of pick up on Dr. Baldwin's point about kind of thinking through carefully how city and university, right, those questions have to be articulated together. Yeah. Yeah, synergy, right, Sherry.
I'll just add one very quick thing to what Keith said there, which is, that point about the sort of power center of the mayor's office in Camden is so crucial, especially if you start to think about how South Jersey politics works and the Democratic machine works to kind of hem in what is possible in Camden. And that is another sort of piece of what this sort of push for equity is going to have to be up against, which is the kind of the Norcross sort of machine that will constantly sort of push back against that. So I just wanted to kind of put that there too, that I had never thought of that sort of push for those mayor's office internships in that way, but that's really it's a really crucial point. So thank you. And do you want me to do that? Did you want me to read? I don't know if anybody else was going to jump in. Donna, do you want me to talk a little bit about demands now?
That would be great.
Yeah. So, we've been working really hard around sort of the beginnings of this contract campaign, and our union's been really fantastic about putting Camden right at the center of that campaign. And I mentioned some of these contract demands that are specific to Camden earlier, but I do want to bring them up again. I know some folks posted a PDF of this in the chat, so maybe they'll do that again. But to be clear, there are concrete things that we're asking for to kind of reimagine the Camden campus, and along with what Keith was saying, that it sort of challenges the face, the city of Camden as well, and to think about those things in tandem. So the key demands that are linked to Camden as we sort of push into our contract fight are: one, to cancel the debt that continues to stop the Camden campus from being able to thrive, spend money, build programs, hire faculty. Along those same lines, diversifying the faculty, and as Keith said, decolonizing the curriculum and reimagining the academic focus. So it's not only a matter of making sure that our faculty sort of demographics come in line with the demographics of our students, although that is crucial, but that can't happen only, right? It has to happen alongside a real sort of rethinking of what the campus looks like, what the curriculum looks like, what each department looks like. There's all these pushes for interdisciplinary sort of work, but so few of those interdisciplinary sort of pushes are really trying to sort of disrupt the sort of ongoing assumptions of a number of our departments on campus. We need a fix to the funding model. So if canceling the debt is only a piece of this, the next piece has to be to ensure that we're not going to hear in 2 more years that there's another $30 million sort of deficit that's preventing us from, once again, hiring, getting the right resources to student, getting the right resources to staff. So that funding model needs to be radically reimagined and reimagined in a way that doesn't silo each campus and silo each department and force us to sort of fight one another for resources. Respecting Camden's success. And what that means is understanding that where we have been successful in recruiting the students in the last 5 or 6 years using things like the Bridging the Gap program, which is extended college access to so many students, particularly Black students, particularly students of color, BIPOC students, that success has been punished instead of respected and admired and held up as a sort of core sort of success of the university. So what we would like to see is the university point to Camden and say, like, look at what Camden is doing and rewarding it. And then finally, something I mentioned at the beginning, but equal pay for equal work, because, the numbers, as you sort of dig into the salary numbers for faculty, both full-time, part-time, tenure track, non-tenure track, the distinctions between Camden and the other campuses, in particular, Camden and New Brunswick, are staggering when you really dig into those numbers, in particular in the College of Arts and Sciences. If you look at the entire campus and you look at business, nursing, arts and sciences, and law together, the numbers actually don't look, those things soften the numbers. But if you go apples to apples, College of Arts and Sciences in New Brunswick and College of Arts and Sciences in Camden, the numbers are stark. And it's the way that it's a signal to the people in Camden of what's valued and what's not. And that's not just the faculty, but again, the students who work with those faculty on a daily basis. I mean, you heard from our students today. You saw how amazing they are. And we're lucky to keep those relationships up. And we're lucky to have them as sort of standing next to us organizing for this. But that sort of equal pay for equal work demand is tied directly to the everyday experiences of students. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Jim. Could we give all of our speakers a huge Zoom hand? You all were amazing. My favorite freedom school ever. And we have a final announcement that is about precisely the kind of formation that Dr. Baldwin was talking about, which is how to think about a national formation that we fight in our own universities and campuses, but we also think about this as a larger coordinated fight. So we have our Vice President, Todd Wolfson.
Hey, everyone. First, I just need to say this was so amazing, so powerful. Thank you, Professor Baldwin. Thank you, Donna, Keith, Jim. Thank you, all the speakers who were fantastic. And thanks for the amazing leadership of faculty, students, community in Camden who are helping lead a fight to transform that city and to transform Rutgers-Camden at once. It's just, I'm so appreciative. Thank you so much. And I'll just say really briefly, and this picks up on, I'm sorry, I have kids all over the place, so forgive me, but I want to pick up on something Professor Baldwin was putting out, which is we do need to build a national movement. We have to both localize these fights, and we also have to build something at the national level, and we're trying to do that. Sherry put it in the chat. It's called Higher Ed Labor United. We have a summit that begins this Wednesday. It's Wednesday and Thursday of this week, and Friday and Saturday. Higher Ed Labor United began organizing last spring. It's now 120 unions and advocacy chapters representing over 550,000 workers in higher ed, every type of worker, from full-time tenured faculty and dining staff, professional staff, adjunct faculty, postdocs, nurses, doctors, janitorial staff, security guards, dining grounds, every type of worker, every type of institution too, from two-year community colleges to four-year privates, four-year publics. And we're in about 40 states at this point. So anyway, we have a 4-day summit. The goal is to come out with a shared agenda. A shared agenda coming out of that summit. The first day is headlined by Jane McAlevey and the president of the Flight Attendants Union, Sarah Nelson. The second day is headlined by Erica Smiley, the executive director of Jobs with Justice. The third day is headlined by Stacey Davis Skates, the president of the Chicago Teachers Union. And the last day is headlined by our former colleague, Naomi Klein. And we are going to be doing precisely what Davarian is calling for. We're trying to build a national movement that focuses on confronting contingency for our contingent faculty, that focuses on ending student debt and getting free 2 and 4 public higher ed, and that focuses on building with our communities to transform our cities, not from places that our institutions extract from, but actually must invest in and transform the logics. And we need the help of people like you, Davarian, in figuring out how to do that part of the work. But that's the vision. And it's Wednesday and Thursday of this week. It's Saturday and Sunday of this week. And we want to come out with a national vision. And we need all of you as part of it. Thank you, Donna, for giving me a minute to say that.
Thank you so much. We can think of that as part 2, 3, and 4 of the Freedom School. I want to thank my amazing co-host, Keith Green. You want to close us out?
Well, just thank you so much, Donna. I feel like I found like another core group of people that makes me love Rutgers and Rutgers-Camden even more. And so to Donna, to Jim, to Todd, Becky, Sherry, just all the folks who are kind of involved with this work. This has been good for me. I feel energized, even though it's about 9 o'clock at night now. I'm kind of getting a little bit tired, but I'm also feeling energized from just the folks in this room, all my former students, just the way in which we come together. And this is a continuing fight. So this is just the beginning of more stuff that we'll be doing. And I'm very happy that Dennis is going to be in conversation with everyone here. So thank you all. Thanks so much, Donna, DJ Donna, spinning on the ones and twos with Nina Simone. Appreciate you all. Yeah.
Thank you all. Good night.